about demand. And so if you remember last chapter, what we learned about is this idea of these demand functions. We found like the optimal amount of good one as a function of the price of good one, the price of good two, and income. And we did the same thing for good two, and we kind of talked about what these demand functions look like for different kinds of preferences. We went through a few examples of different kinds of preferences we've seen before, and kind of talked about what their demand functions look like. So these are just these demand functions. So what we're going to do this chapter is kind of take a closer look at these demand functions to understand how these optimal quantities, or this quantity demanded, is changing when we have different when we have changes to the price or the income. So here, or this chapter is what I mean by that. We will discuss how demand changes when prices or income changes. So we're going to kind of graphically talk about these demand functions, kind of graph this relationship between the optimal amount of good one and how that optimal amount of good one changes when the price of good one changes. And we'll also separately kind of talk about how the optimal amount of good one changes when income changes. And we're going to use kind of these relationships to classify certain kinds of goods. So we could talk about luxuries and necessities. We could talk about inferior goods and normal goods and given goods. And so that's kind of what we're going to do this chapter. And we're going to mostly do this through what we might call comparative statics. And all this kind of means is, we're going to kind of concentrate on one change at a time. So we're going to kind of hold, let's say we're interested in the relationship between the amount of good one and the price of good one. Well, we're going to kind of hold P2, the price of good two, and income constant when we graph that or discuss that relationship. And we're also not going to we're going to talk about just like the optimal choices that, before and after this price change. We're, not kind of talking about what's happening in between these 2 points. So that's what we mean by comparative statics. All right, so let's erase this board and then talk about this relationship between, the amount of the optimal quantity of each good and income and inferior goods. So first what we're going to do, let's hold price is constant and concentrate on this relationship between income and these optimal choices. And concentrate on the relationship between, so BTW for my between income and the optimal choice. So if you remember, when we talked about income increasing or decreasing, that was causing parallel shifts in our budget constraint. So changes in income, which we've been denoting with M, can be depicted or are depicted with parallel shifts in the budget constraint. So if you remember, I don't know what I was trying to spell there, but I should say constraint, sorry. Constraint. Better. So if you remember, if we had like a positive shift in income, or there's a positive increase in income, or an increase in income, I guess is the way to say that, the whole budget constraint would shift away, a parallel shift away from the origin. So the slope of the budget constraint was still the same. It was just further from the origin. And again, if we had a decrease in income, that was a shift in of the budget constraint. The slope didn't change because the price ratio didn't change. All that was happening is we had this parallel shift towards the origin in our budget constraint. So that's kind of what we're thinking about going on in the budget constraint, and then thinking about the relationship between those changes in income and what this optimal choice would be. So first, a normal good. So good one is a normal good. If an increase in, is a normal good if increase in M is associated with an increase in the optimal amount. So in the optimal, that's supposed to say the optimal amount of good one. So a good is normal if when your income goes up, you purchase more of that good. Your optimal consumption of that good goes up. So in that sense, you can think that change in X1 from a change in income is greater than 0. That would be a normal good. So let's kind of draw out what that, let's depict what that might look like, you know, in one of our graphs of the optimal choice. We'll have a shift in income and talk about whether it goes up or down, and in this case it has to go up. Income is greater than 0. That would be a normal good. Let's just draw these optimal choices. So let's say this is the original budget constraint in purple to me. I'm not sure exactly what color comes out to you. We'll draw a nice, well-behaved indifference curve. And we get some x1 star, x2 star at this tangency point between the indifference curve and the budget constraint. And then we have this increase in income. And so there's this parallel shift out of the budget constraint. Well, they're going to be able to get a higher utility. So let's draw this indifference curve like this, and here's the new optimal choice. x1 star, let's call it star star. And x2 star star. And so if we see that when income went up, the optimal amount of both goods went up. So here, x2 is also greater than 0. The change in the amount of x2 we wanted from a positive change in income. So here they're both normal goods. As income went up, and we purchased more of both of them. Income increased, and that causes optimal choice for both to go up. Optimal x1, x2 also both went up. And so this is what a normal good looks like. And so now let's think about, if there's a normal, that means there must be something abnormal, right? So let's next talk about an inferior good, which has an inverse relationship with income. That is, when the income goes up, we want to purchase less of that good. So let's take a look at that.